As the father of three now adult children, I've had the privilege of watching them, particularly when they were, of course, little, performing in numerous nativities plays. They attended Christian school, and the nativity plays during the Christmas season were a significant event. And I've always enjoyed, myself and my wife, attending and watching our children. And the story of our birth, or the story of the birth, I should say, of our Saviour, is one that never fails to touch and impact my life. And there's something beautiful about watching children reenact the scenes of Bethlehem. And as a parent, a proud parent, my heart would well with pride. And watching the children enact the story, I felt the hope that is contained in all of this. But what is sometimes forgotten, and in all of this and these nativity plays, there's actually a dark underbelly to the Christmas story. It's not that it's ignored, but for understandable reasons. I cannot recall in any of my three children ever seeing one part of the Christmas story ever reenacted. Now, I can guarantee this. The nativity plays that are being held will show, for example, the journey of Joseph and Mary on the donkey, and the song Little Donkey and so on will be sung. They will show the failure of the parents of Mary and Joseph to find a place to stay in Bethlehem. All the plays will include the enactment of the angels coming to announce to the shepherds, and all of the nativity plays will include the story of the Magi, or we sometimes say the three wise men who followed the star and went to the place where Jesus was born. But there's one aspect of the Christmas story that is largely ignored. It's that dark underbelly that I referenced earlier. Matthew actually, who records in his gospel this dark underbelly, this story, and he wrote, "When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said by the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." It's understandable that this portion of the Christmas narrative is largely ignored in the nativity plays that our children will act in through this season. It's a most gruesome and horrifying episode. As we come into the Christmas season, this part of the story spoils the happiness and the jolliness that we expect to be a part of Christmas. This first Christmas and Christmas following, Christmas is supposed to be a time when we can turn away or at least ignore the unpleasantness of life. Christmas is expected to be a time of happiness, of laughter, of merriment, of good cheer, of eating and drinking. But the reality of the first Christmas and the reality for today is far different. For many, Christmas is a time of sadness, loneliness, depression, despair, longing. And sometimes Christmas, the whole season of Christmas, only serves to remind us of things that ought to be but are not. Christmas is supposed to be a time of peace and love, but for many, they feel very unloved. Christmas is supposed to be a time of giving, but there are those who cannot afford to give. Christmas is supposed to be a time of peace and goodwill, but many are at war, not with nations necessarily, but with family. And as I've said, the first Christmas was not entirely a merry affair. You see, King Herod's slaughter of the innocent boys of Bethlehem is integral to the Christmas story. His action was singularly horrifying, brutal, tragic, but yet it is a part of the story. It started when the Magi announced that a king was to be born in Bethlehem. And Herod took this as a direct challenge to his kingly power. And King Herod, he was a man who would do anything to retain power. Herod would sacrifice anyone, betray anyone, so long as it meant he retained his power base. I think you'd agree with me that both history and contemporary times have shown us that we live in a world of desperate kings. Kings who will do anything, sacrifice anyone, step over anyone, trample down anyone, so long as they maintain that which gives their lives purpose, power. Herods of the past and the present, they will sacrifice the welfare of the nation that they are supposed to serve, so long as it means they keep holding on to power. There was an evil in the world at the time of Christ, and I'm sure you would agree that there is an evil in the world today. You know, Herod was in his late 60s when Jesus was born. He was an elderly man who felt threatened by a baby. Herod had been appointed king of Judea by the Roman authorities around the year 4 BC, approximately 40 years before Christ was born. And at the time of Jesus' birth, he had been in power for over 30 years. Now, during his reign, he had successfully undertook many civil rebuilding projects in Jerusalem. For example, the walls of the city were renovated and strengthened. An amphitheater was constructed under his administration. A new office for the Sanhedrin was built, and he began the rebuilding and renovation of the temple. But for all of his building projects, Herod was an unbelievably cruel and authoritarian ruler. And it's sad to say that the murder of the infant and baby boys in Bethlehem was not uncharacteristic of him. Now, while that action was him, I recognize that it still does not dilute the horror of what he did. But I say, what Herod did in Bethlehem, that was him. History tells us that 3 years before Jesus' birth, he had 2 of his sons, his own flesh and blood, killed because he saw them as a threat to his power. And shortly before Herod died, Herod had a 3rd son killed because he wanted to hold on to his power till his breath was finally gone. Doesn't excuse it. But I'm just trying to say, maybe we can understand a little better Herod's thinking that the killing of some 50 or 60 infant and baby boys was not uncharacteristic of him and of his desire to retain power. Now, Herod had no idea which of the baby boys in Bethlehem was the Messiah king. So, just to make sure he got the right child, Herod handed down as death sentence to all the baby boys in Bethlehem up to 2 years of age. It's horrific. It's horrific that soldiers took their orders. Imagine soldiers who've been trained in the art of warfare were now commanded to enter the homes of parents, forcibly search for and take any baby or toddler boy and kill them. This is a crime so unspeakable, so heinous. The details are even hard to contemplate, much less to describe. I mean, what kind of monster could do such a thing? There's nothing more senseless and tragic as the violent death of innocent babies. What grief is as profound as the grief of parents who can do nothing as they face the military and the policing might of their own country. They are helpless. They are grief-stricken as they watch their precious little ones taken from their arms and murdered. Try to imagine the sorrow of those mothers, those fathers in Bethlehem. Jeremiah, who lived some 500 or so years before these events, foretold this event in his book, in chapter 31 and verse 15, which Matthew quoted. And it's such a beautiful poetic language, yet so sad. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So I ask myself the question, is there any comfort? Is there any hope for those mothers of Bethlehem? What about today? Is there any hope for us today? Yes, there is. And that comfort, that hope, is embodied in the one baby boy who escaped the massacre of Bethlehem. The child that Herod hated because that child was a threat to Herod's power. One child escaped. The child who was truly the King of Kings, he escaped the massacre. And it is to him that the grieving mothers of Bethlehem can find hope. You see, it was necessary for baby Jesus to survive the slaughter of Bethlehem. Ironically, so that he could grow up to die. You see, there would come a time when Jesus would stand before another Herod. Having not seen the face of the first Herod who tried to kill him as a baby, some 33 years later, Jesus would look into the eyes of another King Herod who would seek to take his life. From the second King Herod, there would be seemingly no escape. At that time, soldiers actually laid their hands on Jesus. The child that had escaped the massacre in Bethlehem 33 years prior would not escape death in Jerusalem. You see, the Christ of Christmas had to live in order that the Christ of Calvary might die but rise again. The first King Herod never captured the child that threatened his power base. And even though that first King Herod He's long dead. He's been dead for some 2,000 years now. The same child he tried to kill, the Bible actually tells us he will have to face one day, as indeed all of Christ's accusers. Mark records some of Jesus's words at his trial, where Jesus predicted, and you read this in the Gospel of Mark chapter 14, verse 62, and Jesus said, "You will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." The child that Herod tried to kill in Bethlehem is alive again. And he is going to raise that first Herod from the grave. And Herod will have to answer to the child he tried to murder. So again, I ask the question, where is the hope? Where is the comfort for this Christmas season? Well, I truly believe it is in the story of the child that got away. You see, one child had to get away because he had a future appointment with death. His time to die was not at his birth in Bethlehem, but as a young man in Jerusalem. You see, our hope is in Jesus' death on Calvary's cross, a death that he died in our place. His was a death that 3 days later was overtaken by life. The hope is here. The hope today for us is because Jesus predicted that a day is coming when all of the violence, the evil, and the crying will end because of one child that got away. The child that got away 2,000 years ago, he promised that he will revisit planet Earth again. And on that day, the tears of sorrow will be exchanged for tears of joy as parents are reunited with their loved ones again. It is the child that got away that brings us the comfort that carries us through all of our Christmases. It is the child that got away that makes this Christmas a truly Merry Christmas. It is the child that got away that brings a joy that never ends. I'm so glad that Herod could not kill the hope of Israel as a child. He tried. A later King Herod, a different King Herod, he could not kill hope when he played his part in having our Savior nailed to a tree and then burying him in a tomb. Herod, whether the child killer or the killer of our Savior, neither Herod can kill our hope. That is why we can all sing with meaning, joy to the world. The Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing. And so it is my hope that you find this Christmas a Merry Christmas because of the child that got away, the child who is our Savior Jesus, who is coming away. The child of the first Advent is coming in his second advent one day soon. God bless you this Christmas season.